Okay, I will try better to look at the little camera thing. I know that can get weird because I end up staring at myself when I teach. Yeah, I don't know what that is, but here we are again. And yes, I'm in the same outfit because I've just done this like one right after another. Okay, so teaching part 3 of this first lesson. Okay, so as we get into these first few verses here of Titus chapter 1 through 3, and we're building some of our surrounding sketch of these verses. And we've talked about the pattern in Paul's writings, some of the things that we're going to see specifically in this letter to Titus. And now I just want to talk a little bit about Titus. Who was this young guy, and why was he chosen to be the pastor of this group of people? I know a lot of times we put the two guys together. We put Timothy and Titus together. And there's a reason why we do that, is because Paul had mentored both of these guys in his ministry. And so each of these guys had been sent out to kind of go back and check and pastor some of these groups that Paul had led to the Lord along the way. And so they had to go back and make sure that they were setting up then what we call now national pastors with the teachers. And so these guys were out there and they're like, hey, Paul, we're having this problem. What do we do? Because remember, they did not have the New Testament scriptures at this time. So that's kind of why these two guys, and if I ever say Timothy in the place of Titus, just know I'm talking about Titus. So first of all, Timothy, you'll see, I just did it. Okay, word association. Okay, Titus, you'll see that in I think it's verse 4. I have my Bible down here. Yes, it says, to Titus, my true son, in our common faith. Okay, so he addresses him as a true son, and we're really going to talk about that and some beautiful applications that we can take from that. But this is where he addresses him, and I love the very personal, sentimental, loving, intimate way that he addresses him. It just shows that there's a relationship between this mentor and mentoree that just has brought forth so much good fruit. And this whole idea of mentoring and mentorees and all this kind of stuff, it is such a biblical process, and why I'm so much into the aspects of our ministry, training mentors and encouraging people step into someone's life. It's not only just a beautiful thing that can happen, but it is commanded of us. So I just wanted to mention that. Okay, we have a first mention of Titus, and you'll see that there. First mention in Galatians chapter 2, verse 1. You'll see, year-wise, this is where he's actually first mentioned. And, the belief is that he was there with Paul when he was writing this letter to the Galatians. And so the Galatians were another group of Christians, and they were getting some false teaching coming in there, and Paul was ticked off when he wrote this letter. So there is Titus observing his mentor dealing with a group of believers that were just being bombarded with false teaching, and they were actually starting to believe this, and he sees the righteous anger, what we call the righteous indignation of his mentor Paul, and he's like, whoa, what he's talking about must be really important. And some of that flows into the importance Paul puts on Titus in telling his people this. So that's where he's first mentioned. He was a Greek convert. Titus was a Greek convert, one of Paul's converts, and it's such a beautiful thing when you can lead someone to Christ, and then you have the privilege of mentoring them and helping them be discipled and growing in the faith. Paul says about him that he was very young. Okay, we believe him to be somewhere toward, maybe his early 20s at this time, even if that old, but he's very young in the faith, but grew spiritually. He was spiritually mature and good with people. If there's two things you want to do as a believer that you want to become better at, it's in knowing God's word and getting better with talking with people. It's not enough just to say, well, I'm not good with people, or, I'm not an extrovert. Part of us as believers is sharing what we've learned. And we can't just hide behind maybe personalities or just things that we're not comfortable with. And so here it is, a young guy, and he's put in these situations in front of all these believers, okay? And Paul thought of his mentoree, this young son in the faith. He thought him mature enough in the scriptures as well as being good with people. So work on your people skills. Okay, he wanted him to remain uncircumcised. Now, this is a big thing in scripture. If you're not aware of what circumcision is, I feel like saying go ask your mom or someone. But, circumcision is just back in the Hebrew tradition that they would, when a young little boy was born, that they would remove the foreskin, the top skin, off of, what we call his male parts, okay? And that was just for cleaning and for cleansing. And so they attached this with being very godly in the Hebrew Jewish tradition, okay? And that was part of the law. It was very important. So Paul's coming along, and he has this mentor, Titus, and he says, Titus, you don't need to get circumcised. You don't need to do this to be an official Christian. And that is part of the problem that he's having to address here, okay? Because people were coming in and saying, you have to be circumcised to be a true believer. You have to be, do all these things of the law. And Paul in Galatians says, oh, no, you don't. Oh, no, you don't. And you see how this thinking, which we call that legalistic thinking, was creeping up in all these areas. So once again, Paul had to say to Titus, listen, I used you for a reason. We kept you uncircumcised for a reason so that I can tell people, listen, Titus is a believer. He's my son in the faith, and he's doing the work of the Lord, and he is not circumcised. So he remained uncircumcised. Paul refers to him as his partner, as his fellow co-worker. And I'll tell you what, there is nothing better than having brothers and sisters to be your partners in your ministry work. And that is whether it's your vocation or it's things you add alongside of the thing that you do to make money to live. And just having partners there. I'm a firm believer in when you do ministry, do it in teams. Have a partner do it. And I've had some wonderful partners and wonderful co-workers along the way, and I wouldn't trade anything for them. So Paul thinks very highly of him. Paul used him, as I was saying before, as a personal illustration that salvation was by faith and not works. Okay, and so we see this. Okay, this is going to be a little hard to understand if you go to the book of Acts. Okay, if you take the book of Acts like this, all through the book of Acts, where the church was being established, Paul was writing out these letters. And so there comes a place around Acts 15, I think it's the Jerusalem Council. Pretty important thing that took place. And Titus was with him at this time. And so, Paul was like, listen, you people are saying that, to be saved, you have to do these things. And he's like, here he is, illustration A, Titus. And so everyone there knew that Titus was not circumcised. So he was using a personal illustration. Paul did leave him in Crete, this Cretan area. Now, what was interesting is some of these people, and you'll see, that he's writing to these Cretans, this island of Crete, some of these believers at Crete got saved at Pentecost. You'll see that back in Acts. They addressed the Cretans in here. So that's where some of these people got saved. And Paul must have taken Titus back with him there to develop that a little bit more, to bring more truths of the gospel there. And so there was a pretty good group of these people. The problem is these Cretans were just like the worst of the worst. And so this believer of, this small group living here, they were surrounded by the worst of the worst, and they only knew a lifestyle that was the worst of the worst. And so this is the group that Titus is talking to. So Paul says, listen, I'm going to leave you here because there's some things that are left undone, and I need you to fix these things while you're here. And just a beautiful example here of, Paul always investing in someone. He was always investing in someone. So his relation to Paul, he calls him his true son. That ought to perk you. Now, wait a minute. I don't know that Paul was married and gave birth and he was his true son, what we would call true son, but we ought to perk up at that. Why does Paul refer to a young man that is not his biological child? Why does he refer to him as his true son? Okay, we'll talk about that. So why did God choose for Paul to use Titus in this way? Now we have this letter. Well, as I said before, and you can put this here, he was at the Jerusalem Council with him, which was very important because Paul established there at this Jerusalem Council the basis for salvation and just said it very boldly, and we still hold to that today. And there's another mention, and this is probably why Paul used Titus in this way. He's mentioned in 2 Corinthians 8 in verses 16 to 23, and this is what he says, man, Titus, we had some problems with those Corinthians in that Corinthian church. And buddy, you handled those problems well. You handled them well. And because of that, I'm leaving you here with these group of people because you know what? You've just done a good job. You've done a good job. You've listened to your teaching. You've done the right things in the hard times. You've made the hard decisions as a leader, and you've been following the teachings, and you've been faithful to these things. And you know what? You're the best man for this job. And so he leaves Titus there in this island of Crete with these believers, and we in turn get some very good instruction on how we can live as believers as well.